And then on the don't side, don't say anything in an interview you wouldn't want to see or read about the next day, ever. Don't lose your temper. Avoid no comment, although Nate's comment in mind, there are times when you have to seemingly do that. You're obligated by law to avoid comment. Don't ever accept a reporter's facts and figures as gospel. Some zealot may get to a reporter, feed them a whole bunch of information that's fact. Now, a reporter is in a process of ferreting out what is fact and what is not. So it's your obligation to not accept what the reporter says is fact and get to the facts that you know, period. Even if they, in our session with the administrators earlier this year, outlined, and Nate, you can speak to it from your perspective, but I think, Suzanne, but this is a process that works well. It's comfortable, it's effective.
I wouldn't say it's comfortable.
Okay. Suzanne was really a star in her interview phase. Wouldn't you say? I mean, everybody felt that. Everybody felt that.
Right.
But we will take these point by point, because I think they're too important to pass over in just a quick read here. When the media first contact you, and again, I'll interject, whether it's a parent or a citizen on the street or anybody, that definition of media, the first thing you want to try to do, if you can, is to buy some time. Now, most people are going to give you that time. Most people are not under such a heavy agenda that they can't give you some time. Where that becomes more difficult, obviously, is on the street. You encounter somebody on the street, and they don't want to let you go. But you need to figure out there, and we'll talk about that, some of the things you can do in the area of bridging and ducking and blanketing their questions to get you some time. And that's what you're really after. But the idea is to buy time so you can do the homework you need to do. You never should feel compelled. If you feel compelled, that's a sure sign that something's wrong. And you may be too close to the subject, you may be too emotional. Take the time to bring yourself into composure and think that process through. If you feel compelled to conduct the interview on the spot, chances are that's going to lead you to some trouble. Take the time and get yourself, I mean, unless it's so minor and ridiculously simple that you don't even need to think about it. You've already pulled that together. And in that process, always remember, never speculate. Never speculate. I keep coming back to that, and I probably sound like a broken record, but I see speculation almost every interview I encounter. And the reporter is almost sure to ask you the what-if kinds of questions that lead you to that speculation. You probably can rattle off experiences you've had recently where that, in fact, was true. So that speculative angle is very important to keep focused on. Don't do it. Don't do it. I can't think of a time when it's ever done anybody any good. Try to determine the angle of the story. And this is all, in your buying time phase here. Try to determine the angle of the story. If you know where the reporter is coming from, then you can probably, therefore, anticipate questions that you're going to get asked. And moreover, who else is or should be involved in the process. And that may already have been decided, and you'll know that off the top of your head. But get the angle if you can. The reporter may not divulge the angle. If you give me a call back, fine. I'll talk to you about it, but I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to ask you right now. I'm not going to get into what we might want to talk about right now, but the subject is whatever. And that's it. That's all I'm going to tell you. And that's sometimes their effort to try to keep themselves on top of it and in control. They don't want to divulge so you get too prepared. It takes away from the candidness of the interview process. So they hate me telling you this stuff in short because they don't want to lose that candid nature. And it's your job when you do actually get to the interview to come across with that upbeat, candid, honest nature so that they don't feel compromised either. I mean, that's an obligation on your part. try to get the reporter's deadline out of respect for their deadline. And if you say you can agree to it, do it. If you can't, say so. If there's no way you can meet that reporter's deadline, that's not your fault. And they'll try to make you think it is. Their deadline is their deadline, but that is nothing. And remember, in the scope of things, it's just not that important. It's probably not that important. And then know and arrange where and when and how you'll meet. When we talk about that, it's an example we used was, let's say we decided to grant the interview in this school. Why is that important? Where you choose to meet is going to set the mood. Just think for a minute, let's say the interview was to be conducted in this room. Okay, and let's say the subject was your most recent topic, the vote on time. Where in this room would it be appropriate to have a televised interview? And where wouldn't it be? Which way? Appropriate or inappropriate?
Appropriate.
Appropriate. Why?
Well, I think it just sets a moralistic tone, you know,
Okay.
whichever side of the argument coming down.
Sure. More formal setting. Where wouldn't you have?
In the condom dispenser.
Okay. Is there one in this room?
Not yet.
But the point is made. The setting for an interview, whether it's going to be televised or not, is mood setting. It sets the stage, and that's a very important consideration. And there are some obvious other ones. I mean, if you wouldn't hold the interview in the cafeteria at lunchtime, probably, unless the story happened to be about all the excitement that was going on in the school around this new program or this new event. And seeing all that activity is stimulating. Most of the studies show that if somebody is being interviewed on television on a real negative issue, if they spend their entire time smiling and being friendly, the overwhelming reaction that the viewer has is that it's a positive story, even though they're talking about the most negative stuff in the world. I mean, certainly Clinton had a lot of instruction in that area. He was smiling all the time. And that does have a psychological impact. And it does have a psychological impact even though it may be a print story. If you are upbeat and positive with that reporter or that person you're meeting, even though the subject may be controversial, it has a psychological impact that you cannot ignore. So set the mood, set the stage, take control. Don't, on the other hand, allow them to set the stage. We were dealing with a union issue last fall where a major union wanted to break into a department store and unionize the department store. The problem was the employees didn't want to be part of that union. So the union organized an after Thanksgiving Day or 2-day strike, boycott, that they wanted to have in front of the store. When we met in council, the managers of the stores, in this case, there were some 16 possible locations we had to think could be targeted by the media and a bunch of different media to boot. We instructed the managers to agree to the interview, but never, ever allow for that interview to occur with the boycotters, the strikers as a backdrop. Where did we have them do it? Day after Thanksgiving. Most of these stores had Santa Clauses in their stores. They had all kinds of other festive activities and backdrops with kids and happy people shopping and bustling about. We insisted that they choose locations that had that kind of a backdrop. And what their message was, and the message ties in here too, very definitely, their message was that our sales have never been better, we've got a lot of good specials, folks, come on down and shop at our stores. And that's all anybody ever heard. No matter what the reporter ever asked, that managers responded by saying, sales are brisk. It was a mantra. It became a mantra. Sales are brisk. We've got a lot of good deals. Come on, buy. And we aren't seeing any impact from this boycott, is what they were really saying. And smiling all the time, all this activity behind them. The reporters tried to set up the interview in front of the strike in the boycotting activity, but we didn't allow it. So I think setting that stage is very critical. And then set the time limit of the interview, and in so doing, make sure you control that. And this group, the administrators did a very good job of that. We will have an exercise in a few minutes that deals with that too. You need to set the time limit, and then when you get to it, take yourself out of it. And you control that. Now the reason that is interviews can get long-winded and become fishing expeditions, and that's what you really don't want to have. Reporters will do their best to try to get you off guard, to get you to an informal level, and it's at that point, even though the microphone might be turned off, they might not even be taking notes, but they are actively listening and thinking, and many a quote that people didn't want to get seen or heard in the paper the next day happens just that way. So set your time limit, agree to whatever it is, 5, 10, 15 minutes, you're busy people. And that's to be respected. And if they can't get their story in that framework, then you need to say enough. Now, on the other hand, if you want them there, and you want them to do a lot with this story, you might want to give them more and more time. Yes,
An
Dean?
example of that. This week, for instance, we received, upon returning to school, numerous requests for TV and newspapers for interviews. And we held off responding until later on in the morning after we had met and decided on some of the things that we were going to say and who was going to talk to what issue. And then we called people back,
Great.
which is what we did.
That's the perfect process. Okay, it comes back to not feeling compelled and knowing what the message is going to be, what the likely questions are going to be, and who's going to respond. And you can't have as many surprises, let's put it that way. Did you have any surprises even with that?
Oh, yeah.
But they were easier to deal with.
Yeah, they were. And what we tried to do was establish a spokesperson policy so that on this particular issue, we were going to direct people to 3 people to talk about it. That would have been our assistant principal at the high school, principal at the high school, and myself. So that if reporters called, they would be funneled, and people had different responsibilities as to what particular things they would be talking about. And we try to move it away from a lot of other people who felt more uncomfortable until they didn't want to be in the spotlight.
Sure. It's an important thing to remember that most people get very nervous at the very thought of doing the interview. So you don't necessarily want them up in front either in that respect. And they don't want to be, so work that out. And I know you've got within that, I know you spent some time thinking about the various audiences who would be interviewed too, besides yourself. And factor in them, so you could go out, as we did with the main project too. In each school, we identified students that could be interviewed, it would be good interviews, pro or con, would have been good interviews, and faculty the same, and so on. Depends on the subject and the story, but that's how you build in some control to the uncontrollable media event. And that's really the truth. And then concentrate as well on the messages. Here are the likely questions, and here are our responses to that. Not so that some reporter can find that briefing paper and say, geez, well, this is all contrived and orchestrated. I mean, people will tend to put that into their own words, but the same message comes through. And you know what that message is. And certainly on that particular issue, messages I heard, and I was in Maine when the story broke, and I heard it on television stations, on nightly news in Maine, and read about it in papers. The messages that came through, no matter what the vehicle, were largely the same. And I think that's an important goal, regardless of the story, to get one clear voice. This is what we did. Anything else on that? So the next steps is, and really this speaks to this process again, is in this very specific example, a school board. You don't want to get blindsided out there, for sure. You may not know that an issue, try as we might to keep informed and on top of all the issues out there, there will be issues that pop up we are not ready to speak to. So part of the idea of buying the time is to get yourself informed and to figure out whether or not you should even be speaking to it. So one of the next steps in this case as a school board member, it seems to me, is to plug yourself into the network and say, if this is a blindside, kind of an interview, you don't know much about the subject, let's say something happened in the school. You've been busy and hadn't been contacted yet, but the reporter gets to you and says, what do you think about so-and-so who has just announced that he's going to boycott graduation? The logical next step would be to buy time and say, gee, I'm going to have to get back to you. I can't respond to your needs right now, but I will get right back to you. And by the time you need to get to the superintendent's office or wherever the likely facts would live, and get the story, and know what their strategy is going to be. And if the strategy hasn't been set, you can say right then and there, we've got to do something because this is out there. We need to come together as a group and know what we're going to say about this, and get at that. So this step, we said here, contact the superintendent's office, but it could be any number of places. But the superintendent's office certainly is a likely spot where a call will be placed. And probably the superintendent on a subject just like that story would have already been called. But, it might be just that simple. Nate may have the call and formulating a response. You happen to be going downtown to the post office and this reporter happens to just run into you in the process. And that's how the scenario can work. So we need to, there's almost a logical funneling of information on any given subject. And a good source to start with would always be to come right back, because even if Nate doesn't know about it, he's going to have to somewhere along the way, and that gets that process activated. So, Robin.
I was just going to add in an example where it wasn't a reporter, it's actually the opposite. In working with this waste company, the word got out on the street that they were about to purchase this property that was adjacent to a landfill that they were currently working on remediating. And so the word was out on the street. There had been no formal announcement made yet, but people were talking basically. And so we got together for a quick strategy, knowing that the word was out on the street. We decided we're going to pitch the pitch instead of just be reactive in this case, and we got a press release out there to confirm and get the kind of messages that we wanted out there in terms of what we were purchasing this property for, to alleviate some of the people's fears. Obviously, we still got all the hard questions at the public hearing to follow at the public meeting that very next week. Of course, members of an opposition group showed up in droves and had a lot of hard questions for us, but knowing the word was out on the street, that we used the media proactively in that sense, got a press release out, got to our key people beforehand, before sending the release out, telling them what was going on and why we were purchasing the property, which is really for mining purposes versus development of a landfill, and then came into that public meeting prepared to answer. And the fact that it was in the paper, in that sense, almost confirmed that, yes, we have nothing to hide here. We're being proactive about it. The purchase hasn't happened, but we intend to do it on this date. So that's an example, whether you're responding to a reporter's call, or you might just be responding to, gee, there's some rumors out there, and there's been talk internally of developing a program, and you're starting to hear from your network that this is an issue out there.
Sure.
There might be a chance where you want to turn that into a proactive situation.
Some other things you can do to get yourself prepared, say the story hasn't been known or dealt with, is to really immediately get into what we call an environmental scan. But a scan is just simple enough here to get at related stories and how it's been dealt with. I mean, with any school system, there have been any number of issues that have cropped up over time, and ways that you utilized to deal with them, and ways that were effective and some that were not effective. And you can also get a sense of other school systems. Your affiliations with other schools will be very instrumental to get a handle on just how they've dealt with the same subject. Just last week, I was talking with a hospital out in West Virginia. They had a major issue blow up, report card system, it was Pennsylvania, report card system on surgeons' success rates. New implementation in the state of Pennsylvania. So you can imagine the scare when a surgeon wakes up to find out that the report card is going to be printed in the newspaper of how many fatalities they've had over the course of the past year. What I happen to know in doing a quick environmental scan through CompuServe that New York State was the only other state with at least recent history of doing this very thing, and I could identify a couple of hospitals with very good public relations staff to find out what in fact they did and what their results were, and connected the two hospitals together, and they were able to work out some strategy very, very quickly because they didn't have any time. So that scanning technique is very important and can save you valuable time because you don't have a lot of time necessarily, as the story is breaking especially. Then prepare yourself, think about the 3 key messages you meant to leave the reporter and you want to leave with that reporter, up to 3 and no more than that. You really don't need to go any further than that. You just want this mantra effect. We've done this is why we've done it. Here's the scoop. Don't spend any more time on it than that. Anticipate questions. We'll spend a quick little time on this. We use techniques, and just if you visualize this one element, you'll always remember this. Okay? A duck. Okay? This duck is crossing a bridge. I didn't spend much money on art lessons, but and carrying a blanket. Okay, when you visualize that, you'll always remember the 3 techniques you can use to deal with almost any question that a reporter gives you. One of them I would minimize entirely, and that's the ducking. And ducking is usually fairly obvious. You're not going to answer the question, you're going to duck it completely. But it's more effective to accomplish that if you remember the blanketing and bridging technique. Bridging especially is a nice technique. Give me an example of bridging, but you can think these through out loud. Any example? No, you can. I'll jump back to it. Let's say a reporter comes along and says, I understand that this student is going to boycott graduation. What are you, as a school board, going to do about this? We may not have formulated a response just yet. You're going to buy some, you've bought some time, you've sat down and interviewed, but you still need more time to get people together to formulate a response. Just can't delay this any further. You say, well, I understand your question. It's a very important question, but let me get back to you in about 2 hours on that. That's a bridge to get you somewhere else. Or that's a very interesting question, and I want to let you know that our school communications committee is going to look at the issues and find out whether or not any improprieties have occurred, or anything to bridge from where the question is to someplace else. Similarly, using a blanket technique, you could respond with so many things that you just literally blanket. You cover the whole thing so tightly that they've got more than they could possibly use. So you just cover the issue with a blanket. Just think of that visual image. By giving them honest, real stuff, but you just say, well, gee, I want to respond to that, but I think we really should be talking to the superintendent, and there is this committee that's going to be looking at it, and we haven't decided whether there's any improprieties or any number of things. Just cover that whole question to the point where the reporter is going to have difficulty using it. They may come back with questions, but then you have the decision to make whether you continue that same answer or not, and I'd advise you to continue the same answer. It almost doesn't matter what the question is. Your mission in going into the interview is to know what the messages are that you want to leave. Like the example that I gave in that department store. Every manager was instructed to say, no matter what the question is. And we knew that some of the questions were, well, gee, it doesn't seem very busy in here. Aren't sales being impacted by the boycott? we understand that this boycott is having an impact, the union people are telling us that. Can you tell us what you're doing about that? Regardless of what the question was, the managers came back and said, we're having sales are brisk, we're having the best season we've ever had, come on down, we got great sales, and smiling all the time to do it. The reporters get frustrated sometimes with that. But is it dishonest? No, it's honest. That in fact, the sales were brisk. We didn't do anything that was dishonest. We actually had numbers to support every response. The point of this is not to be deceptive. The point is that you've got a very short period of time to get key messages out there. So don't mess around with it. Just don't mess around with it. Okay, now.
So basically, then what you're saying is you give the answer that you want to give no matter what the question is.
Right.
You leave them with that too. We had this, I'll just share another example that came up, this situation about, whether or not we would ever develop this particular piece of property that the waste management company had just purchased. We wanted to get them away from that, because that's not something, that's speculating, that's looking into the future. It's nothing that anybody that was being interviewed would be able to have the power to answer. So, we gave them a situation where they would say, it'd be wrong for me to speculate about something in the future like that, bringing them back around to the message we wanted to send, which was that their key focus was on remediating this property that they were concentrating all their efforts on, so they got back to that environmental message every time, always came back around to that no matter what. And that's what, people were left with. And it isn't deceptive, it's answering, but it's going back to what you want to leave them with.
And you will have reporters who say, well, gee, you're just ducking my question. They'll use these same terms, and then you just bridge from that statement and right to something else. And say, no, I don't think I'm ducking your question at all. As a matter of fact, I think this is what's going on. Sales are brisk. It's a great season. Come on down and see what we've got. No, I'm not ducking your question. The fact of the matter is we are remediating this property, and we've got very strong environmental reasons for doing it. No, I'm not ducking your question, but I honestly don't know what the Communications Committee is going to do about the student wanting to boycott graduation. Period. That's the message. There's no point. If the whole idea of speculation, becomes the deviation to get you off of that message. They'll get you to speculate. Well, what are you going to do if the student really does boycott? That's speculation. And going into that territory, well, you can see where are you going to go with that? Where are you going to go with that? You don't know. So you can't go anywhere with it. We can be powerful. We say, well, we're going to insist that we'll have a meeting with his parents. Well, gee, that gets the parents excited. Well, we're going to sit down and we're going to insist that he go to graduation. Well, that throws down the gauntlet. There isn't anything you can do with that.
Well, what about simply saying that, and I think it was true, that, there is no policy that forces a student to attend graduation.
That's a fine answer. Yeah. But you're going down a garden path, then you better be ready to go.
Meaning?
Well, now that raises whole issues about policy. Are you going to set policy?
How?
Are you ready to go down that path? And if you're not ready to go down that path, that's why answering speculatively will take you there. It's tricky. It really is tricky. And it seems so safe somehow. You should be able to do it and not worry about it. But all of a sudden, you find yourself out in this never land where you have to make some hard decisions. And then how are you going to answer that? Well, gee, it's not my job as the chair of the board to make that decision, and we have to take it to the board. Well, when are you going to do that? I mean, they brought you all the way around to some actions, and you're sort of in a box now. But the real answer is, well, we don't know yet. We will know and get back to you. That's the kind of thing that you can deal with. So that's the concept of bridging, blanketing, and ducking, and remember that. You'll never forget it now, right?
It's a good drawing, Dick.
Okay, so, and we want to get into the interview now. We talk about all these things, and you can read those final things, but I want to emphasize one point. At the very end, I say, relax, you did a fine job. There's almost nothing you can do in an interview that's going to make much of a difference out there, folks. You go into these things, you want to leave certain messages, but there's very little damage you can do. I mean, if you look at what we're talking about, the story gets out there, It appears in the newspaper even days at a time. Or it reinforces where people already are on a negative side of the scale. What have you really done? You've done nothing about behavior. And you've got all kinds of other things that you can do that are far more exciting and fun to affect behavior. And if the story is breaking, if you've got a boycott situation, a student boycotting graduation, you're going to probably do something over in this area. And that's going to have more of an impact than anything you could say or do up here. I mean, there are exceptions. If you make some inappropriate remark, totally inappropriate